Whoa! Oh, Lordy. Oh, who is that?
I am the ghost of John Locke.
Oh, John Locke, eh? Pull the other one, the ghost. How come you have a body?
This is no more than the appearance of a body. Look, you can put your hand right through it. In truth, I no longer have a body. It rotted away way back in the early 18th century.
Oh, well, you can't be John Locke then. John Locke had a body.
Nay, but verily, I am he. It is not continuity of the physical body that secures one's personal identity through time. For consider this, is it not possible that one might wake up tomorrow with an entirely different body? A prince could go to bed one night and wake up the next morning a mere cobbler, for instance. I'm not saying it could really happen. I'm not saying that it's physically possible. I'm just saying it's logically possible. There's no contradiction involved. Another way of putting it might be to say that it's not nonsense to say that one could wake up with an entirely different body. We can understand what that would mean. Can you understand what it would mean to wake up with an entirely different body?
Oh, sure I can. I can imagine going to the mirror and looking into it and seeing something else entirely. That's quite likely. I could, it's quite possible, logically possible, I guess, and conceivable.
Okay, so you're saying that you could go to the mirror and see someone else entirely, but that's just a way of talking, isn't it? On this thought experiment, who would you really be seeing when you looked in the mirror?
Why, myself, of course. Me.
Okay, so we're agreed then that it makes sense to imagine yourself with an entirely different body to the one you in fact have.
Yeah, maybe, Mr. Locke. Is it Mr. Locke or Sir Locke?
Mr. Locke Esquire to you, boy.
Okay.
Okay, so if we're agreed that it makes sense to imagine yourself with an entirely different body, that means it's logically possible to remain yourself, even though you have a different body.
It seems so.
Okay, so if it's logically possible for the very same person to have first one body, then another, then personal identity can't depend on the body. And so, even without a body, I may really be John Locke.
Sir John, or Johnny? Okay, well, let's let the body thing go just for the moment. Though I must say you look to me awfully like the DECV Philosophy teacher Arthur O'Neill. In fact, so much so you look like him that I would be very much inclined to say that you are, in fact, the DECV Philosophy teacher called Arthur O'Neill. What could you say to convince me otherwise? I'm a little bit sceptical.
Well, yes, indeed, I may look a little bit like Arthur O'Neill, that remarkably handsome fellow. But you see, I'm not him, because I can't remember anything about being him. As I said, I'm John Locke, and the way that I know I am John Locke is because I can remember being John Locke for a frightfully long time now.
Okay. I see, you were saying that personal identity is a matter of some psychological continuity. That sounds pretty airy-fairy to me. Maybe you were just having some sort of delusional episode or something like that. Maybe you're just kind of some wacky guy who's trying to play some practical jokes. Let me put forward an opposing position. Let's call this the spatial temporal continuity of personhood. And let's imagine that there is, let's take for instance a cricket ball, and there's the bowler running in for the cricket ball, and he has the ball in his hand, and in a flash of a scene the ball is bowled and the ball ends up in the wicketkeeper's gloves. And how is it that I know that the ball in the bowler's hand is in fact the same ball in the wicketkeeper's hand? Well, it just goes through a continuity of spatial and time location. Maybe if I had a really good camera, I could slow down and see the ball moving. And humans are just the same. I could just follow the philosophy teacher Arthur O'Neill and trace him back to where he came from, where he rode in from this morning, and I could say, aha, this is Arthur O'Neill, it's not Mr. John Locke. What do you say to that?
I don't know what you're talking about when you talk about playing with balls made out of cricket, Sonny. Whatever sort of game that is, I don't think it'll ever catch on in England. But I presume that you mean that a physical object can persist through time, and you can see that it persists by following it with your eyes. Well, look, I know that generally speaking, persons have bodies, and those bodies tend to look the same or very similar for quite a while, and you can follow them through time with your eyes. So that bodies are much easier to recognise than somebody's personal psychology might be. But then, because of this obvious continuity, of course it makes good practical sense as a general rule of thumb to get into the habit of recognising someone by their body. But I don't think that that means you are your body. Suppose we were playing some game in the dark where everyone was carrying a different coloured torch and we never swapped torches. Then, of course, it would make good sense to get into the habit of recognising each other by the colour of our torches. And in these circumstances, torch colour is the most practical way for identifying each other.
Alright, so I maybe have a green torch, which means I have the physical body of Julian, and you maybe have the red torch, which stands for the physical body
of John Locke.
John Locke.
Of course. Which I might have borrowed the torch from Arthur O'Neill. Anyway, nevertheless, no one in this situation would be inclined to say that our true personal identity was our torch colour. And to see why we would not say this, all we have to do is point out that it's perfectly possible for us to swap torches without becoming a completely different person. Okay, so by that analogy, we have the habit of identifying people with their bodies because this is generally the easiest way to spot someone. But when we think about it, we realise that you would remain you, the numerically identical person to who you were before, no matter what happened to your body. It can grow, it can lose a limb, it can change all of its component atoms. It's even logically possible that it might change completely in both form and substance, or even disappear altogether. We see that, even though this could happen, just in the torch example, our personal identity wouldn't change, so our personal identity is not actually dependent on the body at all.
Okay. This reminds me of the thought experiment of the cobbler and the prince that you mentioned in that text you wrote all those centuries ago, Mr. Locke. But anyway, for the sake of moving on, I will accept your conclusion, Mr. Whoever you say you are. You might look a lot like Arthur O'Neill, to me anyway, but perhaps you are not. Perhaps you just swapped torches with him. It still seems pretty unlikely to me that you are John Locke. Surely after 3 centuries, whatever it actually it was that made up John Locke must have rotted away or disappeared or just like his body has.
You still have much to learn, Grasshopper. There is no stuff, no substance at all that was or is John Locke. To see that personal identity can't depend on any substance at all, let's just imagine that it did. Can we also imagine that that substance, whatever it is, changes, and yet the person remains the same? For instance, suppose we say that personal identity resides in some immaterial substance called the soul. Can we imagine swapping souls with someone else, yet still remaining the same numerically distinct person that we were before the swap? I think we can. But then, just in the example of the torches above, if it's logically possible for us to swap personal substance, souls or whatever, and yet stay the same person, then this personal substance can't be the thing that secures our personal identity.
I see, okay. But you told me you were John Locke, that you were numerically identical individual as the 17th century British philosopher. If by that you do not mean that you were the same body, what do you mean?
Well, let's look at it this way. What is it that's different for each person and necessarily belongs only to them? Is it not their consciousness, their thoughts, and the interconnection between their thoughts? I am John Locke because I can remember being John Locke. My thoughts now and the thoughts of John Locke in the past are interconnected. They refer to one another. For instance, in memory, my thoughts now can go back and contain my earlier thoughts. I can think now about what it was like to be such a great man back then.
Oh, we're back here, are we? Considering memory and consciousness, I guess. Well, can you remember every moment of John Locke's life? I mean, do you remember what you did on your 20th birthday, or what you had for dinner on the 6th of November in 1644? Was it chicken Kiev, or was it vegetable stew?
I think you might have me there, Smarty. I think I'm going to have to go hypothetical here. Are you up for it?
Oh, I guess that's general nature of philosophy, going hypothetical. You do like your hypotheticals, Mr. Locke.
I do. Okay, well, I'm going to try and refine my account of personal identity a little bit here, so hold on. I want to meet your objection. I am the same person as the John Locke that I can't remember now, or the John Locke when he's asleep. Why? Well, because I want to say that my personal identity is secured not only by the collections of thoughts I can now actually remember. My personal identity is secured by the collection of all the thoughts it's at all possible that I could ever remember. So all the thoughts that it's even hypothetically possible for me to remember. What is it that makes me the same person as the boy who had some opinion or other about his dinner way back in November 1644? Well, what makes me the same person is that it's at least possible I might remember what he thought of his dinner, even though in fact I can't.
Okay, that's a tricky move, Mr. Locke. You have convinced me, but the definition you give me here now seems to be quite different from the one you wrote all the way back in Essay of Human Understanding.
Oh, good Lord, you're not still reading that old piece of rubbish, are you? Haven't you got anything better to do? My word, I've changed my mind several times since then. You know what they say, use it or lose it. Speaking of which, I've got an important dinner engagement. I must go. Goodbye. Toodaloo.
Well, there you have it, Mr. Locke. Goodbye and good riddance.